Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the DVC Show. Coming up, we're going to take a topic written by Mr. Pete Scheidle off disboards.com about how Riviera sales are really going. Coming up next. The DVC Show is brought to you by DVCstore.com. You'll save thousands of dollars on your next DVC contract when you let the experts at the DVC Store help welcome you home. Visit them at www.dvcstore.com or call them at 1-800-550-6493. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Coming to you from the Bob Varley Studio in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Pete Werner, joined at the table this week by my good friends, Sean Fall.
Hi.
Jackie Gailey.
Hi there.
From the DVC Store, Mr. Jerry Saito.
Hello.
Joining us via Skype, Mr. Pete Scheidle.
Hi there.
And back in the production nook, our associate producer, Mr. Corey Fiescanaro.
Welcome home.
And hope your week is off to a good start. Couple things in housekeeping. Want to mention to everybody that DVC Store, if you're looking to rent out your DVC points, you really, really want to go talk to the folks at DVC Store. They are now paying $15.50 per point when you rent them out, and which is awesome. I think that's fantastic. I believe it's among the highest being paid right now, and they're also not doing tiers. You know, a lot of places now are doing these tiers where, you know, points.
At Vero Beach or Hilton Head or Saratoga or Old Key West, you get paid less. Not us.
Yeah, it's all one price, and same thing for renting. There's no tiers. It's not more expensive if you're doing the Grand or something else. It's one price. So it's $15.50 for owners to rent out their points, $18.50 a point. Still a great deal if you want to rent points to stay at a DVC resort. So head over to dvcstore.com or call them 1-800-550-6493. Also, please, we're doing a topic based on a post on disboards.com, my discussion boards, our DVC forums. This topic that we're going to talk about is one of the reasons I am so incredibly proud that I own disboards.com and that we have this incredible community of folks on our DVC forums putting out unbelievable content just like this. And I'm not saying that because he's on Skype. You look across those boards, and there are so many people contributing amazing information. This one jumped out at me because this is a big discussion right now about Riviera resales or Riviera sales and how it's going. Of course, Disney doesn't release sales numbers, so we have to do some, or Pete had to do some creative digging and put this together. Of course, he's an engineer by trade, so he's kind of good at breaking things down.
Thing.
What's that?
Numbers are my thing.
Numbers are your thing. So let's talk about this. What did you discover as you looked at the numbers that are publicly available regarding Riviera sales?
So what I started this article, there's obviously a lot of talk about Riviera and is it worth the money? Is it worth the resale restrictions? That type of thing. I wanted to put something together. Let's forget the discussion. Is the sales something is Disney seeing that the sales are hurting? Are the sales going where you would think they expect it to be? So I started in this article. I looked at over the last year. Or in this thread, I looked over the last year of sales, and I was looking at Copper Creek and also Riviera, but also the other sales as well, to see are the sales softer than you would expect from a resort at this time of year. And I think what we're seeing is that there's definitely a little bit of a softness to the numbers we're seeing from Riviera. Now, is that because of it wasn't open? It's hard to say. Now that Riviera is open, I feel like, and I think you've said it before, Pete, the next 6 months are really going to be the true tale on this. But to me, we've seen quite a tail off in direct sales for new resorts. At the same time, and I don't know if this came out of that thread, or I also wrote an article similar topic on DVC Fan, where I also looked at other direct sales. And what we're seeing is the percent of direct sales from the new resort from Riviera are actually quite low. Historically, if you look over the last several years, sales for the newest resorts, whether that's Copper Creek, whether that's Poly, typically run 80 to 85%, with the other 20% being the historical resorts, being Saratoga, being, whatever. We've seen the last few months that number is actually for the newest resort, being Riviera, that percentage is much lower. We're seeing only around 70% of direct sales coming from Riviera. And to me, that's a good indication that people are staying away from it, that people are calling Disney and saying, gee, I'm not sure I like this Riviera resort. I'd rather have Old Key West. I'd rather have Bay Lake Tower. I'd rather have some other thing. And I think, overall, are the sales bad? I don't think they're bad, but I think they're lower than Disney would want them to be. And I think seeing these sales, the fact that they're being made up by direct sales from older resorts, personally, and this is opinion, I don't think that's what Disney wants. I mean, Disney doesn't want to have to buy back and sell. They want to sell the newest resorts because that's where they make their money. Yeah, they make money from the older resorts by buying them back, but it's not nearly as much. So that's what I got out of the thread.
Well, yeah, and as you mentioned, and as I've said many times, that June, let's look at June, where we are. Let's run these numbers mid-year when it's been open for 6 months. That it's not an unknown quantity. I mean, it is at the time we're recording this. It's mid-February, and the resort's only been open for 2 months. Now I know, anecdotally, I definitely have seen people posting on the boards on Facebook that they went to Riviera and they bought. They bought knowing the resale restrictions because they really loved it. But I don't know that but I've also heard probably about the same number of people, myself included, say, yeah, you know what, I really like it, but no, I'm not buying. I don't want those resale restrictions. And if I am going to be limited to just, staying at, I would rather, because, right now we're hearing on the resale market in general, this resort, brand new resort, is going for $140 a point, which is actually higher than I thought it was going to be. But still, when you consider, this is a brand new resort, and it's only selling for $140 a point. And if you take a look at the current incentives that Disney Vacation Club has out for Riviera, this is probably the best indication that Pete is absolutely right that these numbers are soft. When you take a look at the incentives they're offering right now, I believe on 250 points or 270 points, it's averaging out to be $175 a point when you factor in the incentives. So
I actually thought it was even less than that because I had seen something about it where people were getting offers on it, and I thought it was running as low as 169, but that might be lower than I think depending on what the threshold was.
I saw that too for if you bought the right number, it was like 169.
Yeah.
But think about that. Disney is discounting this brand new resort.
Oh.
They are discounting this brand new resort. Now they have to do that with Alani because Alani has been open for what? 10 years? 11 years?
2012. 8 years. 2012.
And it's still not sold out. Not because the resort isn't amazing. It's because the resort is located in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And, you take a look at the number of members that are concentrated in the Northeast and on the East Coast of the United States. That is a long trip. With that said, it is a worthwhile trip to make. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that, but go ahead.
Mostly for Jackie and Pete and Jerry, since y'all have been around the DVC world longer, how
I've
does
been around it as long as you have.
no, I meant Pete Shidley.
Oh, I thought when you said.
How quickly did Saratoga Springs sell out?
Oh, it took a while for Saratoga to sell. It was
Yeah.
such a
Massive.
massive resort. Yeah.
Right.
But
But
like
you gotta
a
remember,
resort
Saratoga
like
had
Grand
14 million
Floridian.
points.
Do what?
What's that, Pete?
Saratoga has like 14 million points too.
Right. I guess I'm trying to figure out like what the comparable hype would be, because it's one thing to say, like for me, I'm not a huge fan of the Contemporary. It's just not a resort. It's never going to be my first pick of a deluxe resort. So were I around at the time when they announced Bay Lake Towers, that wouldn't have interested me, because it's kind of like the threshold of, the sister of that. Whereas, and you could stay and you had something to compare it to, or like Animal Kingdom Lodge, you could stay there and then now there's the DVC option kind of thing. Whereas you could already be familiar with Beach Club and now there's Beach Club Villas. And so it's easier for me to get on board with like, yes, I'm going to buy Beach Club Villas because I already love Beach Club and that's where I'd like to stay. Whereas with Riviera, there's nothing. It doesn't go.
I like
with
Caribbean
anything.
Beach. I want to stay there.
Right.
because-
So, but like with Riviera, I mean, Saratoga Springs is really the only other one besides Old Key West, but that was at the beginning.
Right.
So, like for Saratoga Springs, there was nothing to compare with it of what is this going to be to buy it on the front end. And Riviera's kind of the same way.
Let's ask Jerry, because he's in the sales business.
Right.
So
Yeah, well, when they opened like the Grand Floridian, I mean, it sold out very, very quickly. Copper
Right.
Creek, technically sold out, but I mean, those resorts tend to be on the market maybe 2 years, 3 years before they start selling out. And I think Grand Floridian was projecting faster than that. So, I mean, certain resorts will move quickly, but it just depends on obviously the demand, incentives, whatever Disney's offering.
What I think it really is with Riviera is those resale restrictions. Like when you're shopping for a new home and they say, oh, you're shopping for a home, look at this beautiful new construction. But if you ever decide to sell it and move out of it, we're going to slap this crazy HOA rule on it that's going to affect the next buyer, which is going to affect the value of the home when you sell it. It's the same way with these DVC contracts and Riviera being less appealing because you're going to sell it for less when you finally do sell it.
But here's something that I was thinking about recently as I was doing some research. Depending on the type of transaction in Florida, it is the law in a real estate transaction that you have to disclose any material facts that may not be obvious to the buyer in a real estate transaction. Now, how that applies in timeshare, I don't know, but I will tell you right now, DVC salespeople are not, by and large, making people aware when they come to buy direct that if you try and resell this, there are restrictions that have been placed on this. Now, in a home transaction, in a real estate transaction in Florida, you'd lose your license for that, or you'd be severely reprimanded, because that is a material fact that directly impacts the value of your property. Now, I don't know enough about timeshare law in the state. I don't know if you have any insight on that, but I'm surprised. Maybe nobody's brought it up or nobody's done anything about it because it's perfectly legal, but I would think, on a transaction that could be as much as $50,000 to buy a fractional ownership in a timeshare, that you would have to be required by law to disclose.
It might be disclosed, but in material, like in
probably is in the
paperwork,
contract
rather than, and it is kind of ambiguous. Like I've seen some of those disclosures, and they don't really specifically tell you what the restriction is. So, and I wonder if Disney's dealing as a transaction broker rather than
As a transactional broker, you don't have to disclose it.
you
to-
do, but to a certain capacity. So I wonder what their position is in that transaction.
Right.
Well, I guess because they're representing both the buyer and the seller at the same time.
Right.
They are, by definition, there, because
Transaction.
they are the seller, effectively.
Yeah.
And they're representing both Disney Vacation Development and the buyer in the same transaction.
Right.
So I guess because that would make them a transaction broker, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
I mean,
you have to be legally. You can't be.
well, it's assumed you're always a transaction broker unless you change that.
unless you're a single agent or.
Yeah.
I mean, they may just be selling direct. I mean, it may not be a transactional thing at all because they may not necessarily be representing themselves. I mean, anybody can go sell a house if it's your own house. Like you don't need an agent or anything to do that or whatever. Jackie could sell her home right now to someone else.
And same thing with the
have no real
timeshare.
estate
I mean,
agents involved
Jackie
at
can
all,
sell.
so-
I can sell any one of my contracts myself if I choose to.
Right.
I don't need to go through, but
But they are working; those agents are working directly for the developer. So they
developers,
right,
developers agents. So they're, I don't know enough about that law to be able to say, but I still think that there's probably something sketchy in the fact that shy of saying, hey, we just want to make you aware that there are restrictions on this if you try and sell it, that they can get themselves in trouble, and maybe that's what.
So
I don't want to
make
start. I
a
don't want to.
comment.
I'm sorry. I don't want to start like a thing where, because DVC members are wonderful, but we can be a little litigious when we're pissed off. I don't want to start a thing where people band together and start some class action suit about the restrictions. But I've been thinking about that.
I don't think there's a place to do it because I do think I'm sure they cover themselves, and do they come out right up front necessarily? Maybe they don't, but I'm sure if you ask about it, I'm sure it's in the materials. So I doubt that Disney's doing anything that's not above board in that respect. But I just wanted to step back to what Sean had commented about Saratoga Springs. I think that's a tough comparison to look at the sales for Saratoga Springs because number one, you're looking 10 plus years ago. And at the time, it was very common for them to have more than one resort open at a time for sales. And lately, it's been more individually. And that's why I kind of stuck to comparing recent ones. And so I just want to make this one point. Copper Creek, for most of its, most of the time, it was selling by itself, which was for about 2 years, maybe a little less. It was averaging about 140,000 points per month of sales. Riviera, for the last 6 months or so, has only been averaging just right around 100,000 points per month. So it's, if you're looking the last two resorts, it's quite a drop off between Riviera and Copper Creek.
And then there's another potential here. The prices, like back, 5 years ago, prices were not $188 a point. Like prices have gotten to the point where it's almost unreachable for some people.
Yeah.
Maintenance fees, maintenance fees were in the $6 range. Now at Riviera, they open Riviera, it's $8 and
Yeah.
I thought it was 9.
no, it's one of the higher ones, but still, like again, maintenance fees are high, purchase price is high, so that could affect value. That could affect why they're not selling as good.
And that's a good comparison for sure with Copper Creek. And what makes it even more surprising is with Copper Creek, there is also the option of Boulder Ridge. Like if you're getting it as resale or, you can still call your DVC guide and be like, hey, I want to buy at Boulder Ridge instead of that. When you have two DVC resorts in the same bubble of a resort, essentially, that are completely different, it doesn't, you've already cut off some of your audience because, I'm sure people who already own Boulder Ridge, they're like, well, I don't need to own Copper Creek too because I already own at this Wilderness Lodge area. So, that's even worse for Riviera because Copper Creek kind of had a little bit of direct competition with itself because Boulder Ridge is there too, and you could buy a resale at Boulder Ridge for a lot less than you can at Copper Creek.
And they don't make it attractive to buy those other properties. Like they're expensive. If you look at the prices for like Beach Club, Boardwalk, they're way up there.
Yeah.
Cheaper. Riviera's cheaper to buy than some of those sold out properties.
Yeah, and that's another part of that is to think that the percent of direct sales coming from these older properties have gone up, but the prices on them have risen significantly in the last 2 years. It used to be all the resale a couple years ago. All the resale properties were around the same price, maybe even a little lower. Now they've raised it. Boardwalk is like $200 a point, and Beach Club's $230 or something like that.
Yeah.
So people are choosing more expensive properties over Riviera.
Yeah.
Well, let's make a prediction. I keep saying June. You know, we'll know in June.
I agree. We should revisit this in like 6 months and
But
have
let's-
another conversation.
But I'd like to make a prediction. Where do we think this conversation is going to be in June, Pete?
Boy, it's tough because are the sales soft because the resort isn't open? We really don't have any numbers since it opened because it takes about 2 months for those numbers to go into the county registrar, which is where these numbers come from. My personal feeling is that it's going to continue. It's probably going to spike in the next couple of months, right when it first opened, and then I think it'll tail off again. I think it's going to continue to look soft. I think the resale restrictions are hurting them. I think even what Jerry said. I think the high point charts and the high maintenance fees are probably hurting them too. So we'll see though.
Jerry, where are we going to be in June?
I think sales are going to be soft for a while. I mean, sometimes when new resorts come on, if they're super popular, they sell quickly. But if people need time to kind of adjust to the change,
But
then-
don't you think that DVC was kind of banking this was going to be one of those like quick selling? You know, it's a standalone resort, it's a deluxe resort where, you know,
yeah.
I got the feeling in the run up to the opening of Riviera that's where they were coming from, that they were expecting this to be another Grand Floridian.
Right. Yeah.
You know, they were the ones that were running that. This will be the Grand Floridian of Epcot. And that's where they were expecting this to go, and I don't think they're seeing those numbers. I personally think by June we're going to see. I think we will see a spike after opening, but I agree with Pete. I think it's going to level off, and I think it may level off to a point where they start getting nervous. Because if 3 months after opening, 4 months after opening, those sales numbers are still not rebounding the way they need them to, that's when we're going to see them start asking themselves questions. Should we pull these restrictions?
Because if you think about 100,000 points a month, that's a 7 million point resort. You're looking at almost like 5.5 years to sell out. I'm sure that is not what they want.
No, not at all. What do you think, Sean? Where are we going to be in June?
I think that I don't necessarily know about where we'll be in June. I do think this makes things very difficult as far as them pursuing openings, things like reflections and all that. Because I mean, they're already gearing up for it. I mean, we know it's coming. We know it's something that's getting ready. And if they're going to have a hard time selling out Riviera, not a hard time, but if it's just going to take them a lot longer than they expected, then it kind of puts weird implications on what it's almost a good thing if you're somebody that wants the restrictions lifted, that like there is this time ticking, I guess, because if they haven't sold out Riviera yet, it's going to be really tough for them to be like, okay, well now we're opening Reflections too, and now they've got two resorts that are restricted competing against each other, and you know, that part's just going to be a mess as far as that goes. I do think they're going to save themselves a little bit with the Disneyland tower getting added, because I don't think it matters that there's restrictions.
They could add
for that one.
they could add a restriction that everybody has to wear red shirts and people be all in.
Well,
So-
I think that Disney is going to
I'm ready.
open that. I think it's going to sell very well and very quickly, and I think Disney is going to try to spin the story that like it's not because of the restrictions, because look at this resort with the restrictions, which isn't true because it's a completely different area and setup, and not that. And I know that's where they're headed with that. It's going to do well, and people are going to be hyped
to
up
make
for
money,
it.
they need to be able to sell them here
Right, yeah.
in Orlando.
Right, but I think they'll make the argument that like, oh well, that's obviously not the problem because it's selling the Disneyland.
But by the time they get a
chance,
to make that argument, the damage will be done here already.
yeah,
So you got to remember, we're a good.
And I don't think. I mean, that's not going to be open for 3 years, right? I think if they haven't lifted the restrictions in 3 years, they're not going to lift them at that point.
Yeah.
It's either something that's going to be decided in the next year or less.
The other issue is that if they do, which maybe they don't want to because of how things have gone with Alani, but the other thing is if they don't lift the resale restrictions, they will never be able to build another resort outside of the parks again. Because if they build some ski lodge in Vermont
Well,
and
I
I got to
think-
resell that thing, like no one's going to buy that.
Well,
Like there's
ski
not.
lodges would do fine because people,
Well, like-
the skiers love skiing and they would be fine.
Right,
But,
yeah.
but other places like a Vero or Hilton Head
would never like
work.
yeah. I mean, if they try to do something like that in California or in whatever, they're just not. You can't resell it.
I think Olani has cured them of the idea
of that, yeah,
expanding.
with that they're still not sold out 8 years on,
right.
and not because it isn't a magnificent resort.
Yeah.
That you know
But certainly with a restriction on it, there's no
they get away
way,
with it
like-
here. They get away with it here, and even in Disneyland because they have the theme parks.
Well, then that expands out as well, and not to like continue on, but we have this big looming question of 2042. What happens? 2042, I mean, Riviera and Hilton Head still exist. Disney bought them, and there's no way they're going to be able to reopen that up and then have a restriction on it because who on earth would buy?
You mean Vero and Hilton?
I'm sorry, Hilton Head and Vero, yeah. Hilton Head and Vero, like who is going to purchase another contract at Hilton Head if it then has a restriction on it that they can't get rid of it unless the person wants to stay at Hilton Head every single time?
Exactly. So, be very interesting to see where this ends up going. We will revisit this topic again in June because I keep saying June for some reason, and I don't know why, but we'll see where we are in June. That is going to do it for this week's show. We hope you enjoyed it. We will see you again next week with another edition of the DVC show. Have a great week, folks.